Hello everyone, we are also making it live on YouTube. Hello everyone, we are also making it live on YouTube. Good morning everyone. We'll be starting very shortly, just waiting for some more participants to join. Hello, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We would start now. Uh, General rules, all the audience are going to be on mute. However, if you want to chat, you can use the chat feature. And for asking any questions to the panelists, you may use the Q&A. We would not be looking at chat for answering the questions. May I see a yes if you all can hear me fine in the chat? Great. Thank you, everyone. So I guess we'll get started now. So welcome to Product Talks. Product Talks is an initiative to bring out the insights from the product leaders and share with the product community in India and globe. These talks are way beyond the basic gyan that you can find everywhere. These are directly from the practitioners in the industry to all the people who wish to be in the industry or are practicing. Let me give you a glimpse of the journey so far. So yeah, this is our fifth session and first one virtually. We've had speakers from product leads heads from SignEasy, from PayPal, from Fusion Charts, from ThoughtSpot, etc. And introducing today's guest, Mr. Harish Vaidyanathan. Harish heads product at Waymo. Waymo is the category leader in personal sales assistant space, which is used by 100,000 plus users in Fortune 500 companies. Prior to joining Waymo, Harish spent 18 plus years at Microsoft, most recently running the developer ecosystem for Microsoft India. He has a graduate degree in statistics and MBA in computer systems. He calls Bangalore his home and is an avid long distance runner. Welcome to Product Talks, Harish.
Hey, thank you so much, Santosh. Good to be here.
Thank you. So I guess we will jump into the questions. The first one, we would like to understand your journey to Waymo. So you spent good amount of time at Microsoft, wearing different roles. You were heading the ecosystem, taking care of the whole ecosystem to grow in India, developer ecosystem. You've been having roles in business development and sales and marketing, etc. How did this journey to Waymo happen? What is that opportunity which excited you to join Waymo?
Yeah, so in my last role at Microsoft, I was running the developer ecosystem, and I used to work with a bunch of startups. And Microsoft at that point had an incubation accelerator, and I used to be one of the sponsors slash mentors at that at that at that business. And one of the things that I sort of always wanted to get back to was not just pushing the adoption of Microsoft technologies, but actually to be able to build technology as well. And one thing led to the other, and I thought now is a good time to step outside of a evangelism, developer relations type role to actually product and engineering. And I got talking to a bunch of companies, and I happened to know Pimo from my days back then. So I connected up with Yamini and the founder of the CEO, and turns out there was a interesting product head role which they were looking to fill, and I said let's give it a shot. That's kind of how the transition happened. It's been almost 3 years, and has been a fantastic journey so far.
Wonderful. Thank you for telling us about that journey. At this point of time, I'd like to take a small pause and uh, get a sense of the audience demographics so that it'll help you in also tweaking your answers a little bit to the audience needs. So, audience, right now, there should be a poll which should show up on your screen. You have 10 seconds to put your answers. So I see that around 80% of the participants have voted, 82%. Couple more, we can wait for a few more seconds for everyone to vote. Great. So we have around 85% of the people who have voted. Here are the results. You should be seeing it. So it's not a surprise that most of our audience is from UX field, because yes, F1 Studios being a UX design company, and we attract a lot of UX designers who are interested in understanding the product design, product thinking. That's 47%, followed by product managers who are around 21. And then we have founders and co-founders, CEOs around 12%. A good mix, primarily expected, so around more than 70% mix. And then we have 12% engineers as well. Great. So that brings me to the next question.
Mhm.
I'd like to understand. So, could you tell a little bit more about Waymo, what it is, what the product actually does,
Mhm.
and how it helps their users?
Sure. So our primary target users are salespeople. Now, if you really think about the day in the life of a salesperson, they have pretty hectic lives. You know, number one is if they're sitting in office, it means they're not working, which is dramatically different from, let's say the role of a designer, a developer. Which means if you're in office or in front of the PC, you're working. For the sales guys, it's actually not true. So if they're sitting in office, they're on bench. So the
So
way
you're
we
talking about field sales here.
I'm talking about field
Okay.
sales here. That's our sort of target persona. Uh, and the day in the life, as I was saying, right, it involves meeting customers, running from one meeting to the other, planning your day, following up on actions from the previous meeting, getting ready for the next meeting, uh, you know, having a sales forecast because you got to meet your targets, otherwise you don't get paid, uh, setting aside time for internal reviews. It's a pretty complicated life.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, there has been no tools that have been built to make the life of the sales guy easy. Now, if you actually go and ask, companies, they will say, the tool that I expect my salesperson to use is a CRM, and we believe that's not true, or that's at least not the right tool for the salesperson. Because as far as the salesperson is concerned, they're putting data into CRM. They actually don't get anything out of the CRM. The only reason I'm putting stuff in is because my manager wants to pull reports, my company wants to know the status of the deals. So it's mostly a status reporting tool. There's nothing in it for me as the salesperson. The CRM doesn't tell me whom I should meet next. When I'm going to, I don't know, Kormangla tomorrow at 3 o'clock, who else can I meet while I'm there? It doesn't tell me which deals are more likely to close, which deals are less likely to close, what should I do. So there's like a ton of things that a tool like a CRM actually does not solve for salespeople. And that's kind of the category that we're going after. Now, obviously, we believe, companies need CRMs, but that's probably not the tool that you want to stick in front of the sales guy. What the salesperson needs is something like, a personal assistant who can be delegated a lot of the tasks to. And that's kind of the space that we're playing in, to make the life of a salesperson a little less stressful, a little more productive. That's kind of the place we play in.
Wonderful. So I believe that also, so you're playing well with the CRM companies as well. So you're actually helping enriching the data in CRM, which is the biggest pain point of CRM companies. So you're actually playing well with them,
Yeah,
getting the information which these salespeople put directly back to the CRM. So
correct.
you can coexist in a very nice way.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So going by what you mentioned about the product, it seems the product has a great fit in even in SMB market or an enterprise. I know initial part of your journey, you had both of them. You tried uh, segmenting the market and trying it in all the parts, and then eventually found a greater resonance in enterprise market. So could you tell us a little bit about how did you define that enterprises wherein you would want to go full throttle?
Yeah. So actually, when the company started out, we sort of were focused on a horizontal play, across multiple industries. So we had customers in CPG, FMCG, bioscience, life sciences, and so on. But then, sort of, the moment the first couple of customers happened, enterprise customers in BFSI, we had, we learned a few things. Now, again, we started out of India, so our first customers were all Indian. And at least for the Indian customer, it's very true that every customer thinks of themselves as an enterprise, or at least they operate like that. So if you're going to make a product and give it to, let's say, an SMB, they would have, they had, at least in our experience, consistent expectations on configuration, customizations, integrations as compared to a large enterprise. So for us, the amount of effort that we had to put into the product to make the customer successful was fairly flat, whether it's enterprise or mid-market or SMB. And obviously, with enterprise, you get longer term contracts, higher valuation, deal values, and a lot more reliability in
Sure.
terms of the business itself. So we sort of, had initial success, and then we could build upon that.
Yes, it's very
And that's
difficult once you are in that somebody else can come and disrupt, right? So it's
correct.
an enterprise. Yes.
Yeah,
So
enterprise
how?
customers typically prefer, a longer term commitment, and they also prefer making longer term decisions versus, making changes every other day.
Yeah, I'd like to mention for the audience here that after your product market fit was achieved, right, you got the investment from the best of investors across. So you have so Series A, you got Sequoia Capital, which is known by everyone, and then in Series B, I believe you got it from Emergence Capital, which is the investor who's also behind Salesforce, Zuora, etc. And I happened to read about Emergence trifacta. Basically, they had three priority thesis: industry cloud, deskless workforce, and coaching network. And you very well fit in all the three.
Yeah,
So yeah.
yeah, that was actually a fun conversation because, when we were going through our Series B discussions, obviously we spoke to a bunch of, when investors and ran the proposition with multiple. But then when the emergence conversation happened, we did our standard pitch, which is, hey, we are mobile first. For us, it's deskless workers first. We're focused on BFSI. And we believe, in creating a tool that can coach the salespeople. And then they showed us their slides. So it seemed like like we
A
almost
marriage,
ripped off.
marriage
Yeah,
made in heaven.
yeah. So we don't know
Wonderful.
whether they copied our slides or we copied theirs. But it was quite, quite good fortune that Emergence had such a strong commitment,
Great.
and obviously, great investors, both of them. So in a lot
Wonderful.
of ways, we're fortunate to have them.
Cool. So, would you also like to talk a little bit about when this, I would say, when this focus happened uh, for towards enterprises? Did you have to make a lot of changes in your product per se, from product management standpoint?
Mhm.
What were the changes that you did to be relevant, exactly relevant to enterprises?
Yeah, so multiple things actually. The first thing was, obviously, because we are focused on BFSI and we are a mobile and cloud-based solution, we've had to invest significantly in security, compliance, and certifications. Because as enterprises, especially financial services, are not very cloud friendly, and we work with customer data and salespeople data. So compliance, risk, and security was a big area that we had to invest in. The second thing was obviously integrations, right?
Hmm.
Uh, Especially at enterprise, there are existing systems that you have to work with all the time. So those are sort of two areas that we had to make a lot of investments in. We also decided to pull back our investments in some of the things like, do it yourself, which is very important if you're an SMB focused SaaS player. So the allowing the customer to configure anything and everything they want. That was something that we actually scaled back our investments in, but over the last 18 months or so, we started reinvesting back into that, mostly because it gives customer control.
Okay.
Not that our customers actually use that thing, but they also like to have the control if they want to be able to change it. So those are sort of the big product decisions that we had to make, um, you know, from an enterprise focus
Okay.
perspective.
Security infrastructure.
Yeah.
Okay. Uh, One more thing. So this partnership or with Microsoft Azure that you have. So uh, how was that decision? So uh, what were the other alternatives, and why did you choose to go with the Microsoft tech stack, at least in terms of cloud infra?
Yeah, so actually, because Waymo was in the Microsoft Startup Accelerator, there was a grant that was given, a free Azure grant,
Okay,
fairly sizable grant. So as a company, as a startup, it obviously makes sense to take advantage of the free cloud credits.
sure.
So that's kind of the reason why we moved into that, and that gave us almost a 24, 25-month free runway on the cloud. And as you're building out the business, you obviously want to keep the costs low. So that was the first reason why we moved to that. And of course, we've been intermittently getting some go-to-market help from Microsoft. Obviously, it's not a significant reason to stay on Azure, but once you've made the cloud choice, and obviously Microsoft is doing well,
Yeah.
Azure as a data center has presence in almost all the key markets that we operate in. So for that reason, we've continued to use the Azure cloud. We also have some parts of our services that run on AWS,
Okay.
and of course we use you know Google Cloud Services for some pieces like Maps and so on.
Okay.
But majority of our cloud infrastructure is running on Azure.
Okay, great. So I see some raised hands from the audience. I would request you all to type your questions in the Q&A section, and we would take them. So we may not be able to take all individual questions, but what we could do is we can find relevant themes and then ask those questions to Harish. Great. So Harish, would you like to talk to us about how the product team is structured at Waymo? What's the team ratio looks like, engineers, designers, product people, product marketeers, etc.
Yeah. So at the highest level, so I run product management, design, and I have a marketing team that sort of I work very closely with. And then the engineering organization is completely separate. So Sujay, who runs up engineering, he and I are peers. So I sort of focus on where should we invest, what should the product shape and structure be, what features should we build, how much of the feature should we build. Those are the things that I and my product team takes care of. The actual engineering, DevOps, support responsibility sits in engineering. Our engineering team at this time is almost 50 people. The product team is a little over a dozen. Uh, the product team, at least in Waymo, comprises of product managers, designers, as well as product and analytics as a function. Those are sort of the three things. We're looking to also bring on board a technical writer, in the near future, but obviously put that on pause because of COVID.
Okay, great. And I believe so. The product team directly reports to the CEO, right? So basically, you,
That's correct.
yeah, wonderful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So great. Tell us a little bit about product management, how you run. So how do you define the product roadmap? Because prioritization, I believe, is the most important part because you're running with limited resources and you want to get the most bang for the buck. So how do you define your product roadmap, and what are the input streams from which you get the input data to make your product roadmap
Mhm.
and then prioritize it?
Yeah. So just one step before that, right? Because we focused on enterprise SaaS, we obviously have personas, right? There are 6 target personas that we focus on, uh, and inside our persona there is a customer and then there is a user, and those are actually two different human beings, right?
Hmm.
The salesperson who's actually using Bimo is not the buyer. The person who's the buyer, who's probably the head of sales or maybe even the head of technology, they may not even use the product. They may, but higher chances that they're using other analytical tools and so on. So we actually have, from a product perspective, I have to prioritize what are the features that uh, helps the customer and what are the features that helps the user. And oftentimes they're not the same thing.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. Second thing is, again, because we're enterprise focused, we sort of break our roadmap into 4 broad categories. The first, we call it client commits. These are things that we've told the customer we'll give it, and we need to give it. And these typically would be things we would say yes to the customer only if they are on our product roadmap. So think of this as accelerated product roadmap items. So things that we said, hey, we will anyway do this because a customer is asking us, we'll do them sooner. That's the first category. The second category we like to think about are, the actual roadmap items, right? Which are, hey, longer term investments. This is not blocking any client, it's not blocking a sale, but it's a new capability that we want to give to our customers or our users. That's the second category. The third, of course, are productivity related items. So, for example, if you have 10 features, how do we make it easier for either our product team or for the engineering team or even for our customers to be able to deploy those features faster? So that entire category we move it into something called as productivity. That's the third thing. That's a high leverage item for us actually. Right? And last but not the least is a category I call taxes, which is technical debt, product debt, things that we cut corners on. That's coming back to bite us. It used to work for a company when we had 1,000 users, but doesn't work when we have 10,000 users. So that's the third category, or areas where we're getting a lot of support tickets from our customers on. So those are the four broad areas: client commitments, strategic roadmap items, productivity enhancement items, and then taxes or debt, which could be product debt, technical debt, any kind of debt. So from a roadmap perspective, that's what we want to try and balance, at least on a quarterly, monthly basis. The other thing, from a roadmap perspective, is we used to do annual roadmaps, but then we, pretty quickly moved away from multi-quarter, multi-year roadmaps into quarterly, monthly. So at this point, again, if you look at Corona, right, when we were doing our AMJ planning early in March, it didn't look the way it looks right now. So in some ways, it's a good decision that we decided to move to almost a rolling monthly and quarterly roadmap. So from an engineering perspective, the uh, the deadlines that we work with is before the month starts, engineering is completely unblocked, and the product managers and the product team are sort of working on the next one. So if you look at right now, the product team is completely focused on June. And when I say product team, I mean all the functions, UX, design, PMs, everyone. So all of us are focused on June. Engineering is absolutely heads down, executing May.
Okay.
And we want to sort of get further ahead in terms of being able to do multi-quarter thinking. But with the uncertainty that's around us, it's probably better not to be theoretical about we must have a roadmap. We have to be very practical about these things.
Yeah, very rightly said. It always helps. So I believe the days of having multi-year roadmaps, so you can have a theme in mind, but then you cannot have like multi-year roadmap today. The best is to take, and the market is so dynamic. You are creating a category. I'd like to say you're category leader, which means that you have to be more agile.
Right.
Since you mentioned Corona, and most of your product is being used by field sales, so is the right now the usage absolutely zero, or still a lot of things can be done on your app today?
Yeah, actually, that's the fun thing, right? So when the initial lockdown happened, around the end of March, as a company, we had already locked down. So we were 2 weeks into the lockdown when the government announced the lockdown. And during that period, we sort of saw what might be coming up. That, hey, field sales, which is our primary use case, might be reduced to zero. So we did a bunch of things, very rapidly in the early parts of April, as the lockdown was, becoming real for customers. And actually, I'm very happy to, report that we've not had a zero down. So obviously we track daily active usage. The impact on our daily active usage at this point is about 10 percentage points. So it's not bad at all, because we've enabled a ton of, we call these work from home capabilities. So if you look at, for software engineers, it's not a problem. For technology people, it's not a problem. We can work from anywhere, just give us internet. But for salespeople, it is a problem. You need to have access to customer data. You actually need to have the customer's phone number, and cannot take that for granted. because you'll be surprised how many banks in the country have CRM systems that are only on premise. You cannot access the CRM system from outside. So
That's for security and privacy reasons?
primarily for security and privacy reasons, and also a general anti-cloud
Okay.
sentiment that banks have. So, some of these banks have actually used this Corona time period to deploy Vimo rapidly and get that customer data onto Vimo, obviously in a secure manner and all that. So more than anything else, I think the digital transformation impact of Corona has been very high. So in that sense, we've been a benefactor, and that's the reason why salespeople are now able to sit from home and continue engaging with their customers, continue making the sales and so on. And again, as I said, right, BFSI is our major focus. So at this point, the impact has not been that significant, fortunately.
Wonderful. I think, as Satya Nadella recently said, right? So, this Corona situation has actually accelerated the digital transformation of various organizations
Correct.
multifold.
Correct.
And I think same goes with banks. So I'm not surprised when you said that they have a lot of data on on-prem, because we work with some of the biggest banks in India,
Mm-hmm.
and yes, we know of those limitations, right? So it was very on-prem. A lot of, let's say, Google Drive, etc., are still not accessible.
Hmm.
Uh, for all security reasons. But then we would have to figure out ways to move to cloud in situations wherein people can work remotely in the best manner possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
Great. So I'll take an audience question. So we have some questions here, and I would like to bring them when we are talking about those aspects. So there's a question from Shilpa on the prioritization. So especially we are talking, let's say, BFSI or insurance, right? Let's say banking or insurance. How do you deal when there is a priority compliance requirement, right?
Hmm.
Which is inevitable. So how do you reprioritize your product roadmap? Uh, let's say you are in ongoing release. I do not. How much did you say was your release cycle? 1 month?
Actually, our uh, release cycle is both an asset and a liability.
Okay.
So our backend releases, literally twice a week, twice or thrice a week,
Oh, wonderful.
and our front-end app releases twice a month, which is the
Okay.
middle of the month and the end of the month. And that's actually, I mean, I think for software companies, that's an asset when you have a
Yeah.
really rapid,
CI/CD. Yes. Yes.
yeah, but when you work with enterprise customers, almost every single customer is like, dude, no, that's too fast. Can you slow down?
Okay.
So, so for us, it's a weird situation,
Mhm.
and obviously for that reason, we maintain backward compatibility on our apps. We don't force app updates. We tell customers, hey, you can be on up to 18-month-old versions, and we will continue to support you. But beyond that, we don't. And 18 months is really long. Like, I mean, I don't think customers or people expect that an end user has an app on his phone that he is not updated for 18 months. Like,
Mhm.
nobody, I mean, I'm sure nobody here expects that. But we see that. We actually see users who just don't update their app. So for that reason, combined with our agility, we've had to do a lot of funny things to support backward compatibility. But
Okay.
anyway, just coming back to the compliance
Compliance.
question.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the most part, right, compliance is not a surprise. So there are very, very few cases where compliance suddenly creeps up on you.
Okay.
It doesn't, right? Compliance is a very, very known, doesn't change dramatically. Sure,
Mhm.
there are, industry events that cause uh, extra focus on something, or for example, there was a recent leakage of customer data at Axis Bank that happened via their SMS gateway.
Mhm.
So those kind of concerns come up and suddenly it becomes an important discussion point.
Yeah.
But there is really no sudden compliance that comes up, right? It's
Unless you're talking about demonetization or things like those.
correct, correct. But and those are also industry events, not necessarily something that changes overnight.
True.
Yeah. So one of the things we've noticed, or the way we think about it, right? Number one is we care a lot about security, privacy, compliance.
Mhm.
So we do self self audits as part of our ISO certifications. We also engage ourselves. We engage third-party independent auditors to do compliance, security, pen testing on our infrastructure and our apps and services. The third thing is we actually contractually allow our customers to audit us, which actually is a is obviously a double-edged sword, but it gives customers a lot of confidence.
Yeah.
So, so a bank can say, hey, dear Mr. Deloitte or dear Mr. PwC, go audit Wimo. Go audit the app, do a pen test, do a vulnerability assessment, and give the report back to me and to Wimo, and we'll make Wimo fix all those things. So that gives customers a lot of confidence. Sure, it's not easy. I mean, absolutely, it's not easy. But we've had a couple of cases where customers actually did the audit. They came back with a couple of high, medium, low priority items, and we actually fixed those.
And this is all proactive measures that Wimo took.
Correct.
Wonderful. That's great. I think the industry should adopt more such practices, because eventually what happens is you build the credibility, and it becomes much more easier for others to also understand how secure, private you are with these audits when they are done by the customers themselves.
Yeah.
Great. I'll just look at some of the other questions right now. So one of the questions is, so this is from Neil. He's asking, what's the initial step when your product is ready and you want to deploy it to the first region? What are the human operations and resources needed for that? So, so maybe go to market or.
Yeah, that's an interesting question actually. I would not worry so much about the human operations and human resources side of it, but clearly, getting the first customer and getting your first 100 users, however you get them, is super, super important. Now, obviously, if it is enterprise, then there is a sales cycle involved. If it is SMB consumer, the approach is different. But I would always start with, hey, what is the job for the user that the product is solving? And again, since we are in the world of mobile apps, it's a very important question, right? I'm sure many of you would have heard about the jobs to be done framework, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the GTD framework. So what job is the user going to use Wimo to solve? So I use Ola to solve my transportation problems. I use Wimo to solve my productivity problems. So those are kinds of the fundamental questions to be answered from a product MVP standpoint. And then, of course, the sales and user acquisition vehicle will vary. That's sort of how I think about this.
Okay. And so how do you do product marketing? There's a question about, can you elaborate about a product that's marketed poorly? What can be done better? So I'd just say, I'd rather put it in a way that, how do you solve product marketing? What do you do about new releases being communicated to your users? Is it all contextual help within the system, or is it you have full-fledged sessions wherein you take your key customer accounts? How does that work?
Yeah. So marketing for us has two flavors. One is marketing to prospects and future customers, and the other, of course, is marketing to existing customers. I'll talk about the marketing to existing customers because that's kind of very important and very relevant for us.
Yeah.
If you're in the enterprise space, you always have a lot of expansion opportunity. You can go to other departments. The department that you've sold to can add more users. So there's a ton of expansion opportunity inside the account, and that's the reason why I'm focusing on that part of the discussion. So we have a product marketing team which actually sends out, at a minimum, a monthly update on the product to the customers, and we send this out to the buyer. We send it out to the Wimo point of contact, and we send it out to a few other stakeholders. And we make it a point to tell them, not just what is coming up and what's been released, but also back it up with an exec level conversation. And again, being in the enterprise space, we have quarterly reviews of our relationship of, hey, is Wimo working for you? What's not working, and so on. So we kind of have a human conversation on a quarterly basis with the customer, as well as sort of a digital mechanism. And remember, for us, the buyer and the user are different. So a lot of our marketing efforts are focused on the buyer, on the customer, not necessarily on the user. On the user, it's a lot of enablement, which is, hey, did you know this feature is available? So we have, some kind of in-app education, if you will. I think we have a lot of work to do there. But we have some in-app messaging to help the users discover the feature and so on. Yeah.
Great. So we are around 11:38, half the mark. I'd like to just summarize for our users a couple of important points that we have discussed. That will also give you, like, let's say, a minute break, uh, because you've been doing a lot of talking, and I'm mostly listening. So it's what we have heard, got to learn from Harish, is that once they moved from SMB to enterprise, the biggest concern areas were the security and infrastructure. The way at Waymo they prioritize their input streams for their product roadmap are majorly from four parts. One is the client commits, which are the parts in the roadmap which are already there, but then since a customer has asked about it or we've committed to the customer, it gets accelerated. So that helps in priority. The second part is the roadmap, long-term thinking, the strategic way that Waymo wants to grow the product. Then there's the productivity related improvements for the reps, and finally about the taxes, the technical debt, or other kind of debts that the product evolve accumulates over time. So that was great to hear. Other important point which we noted was that in today's world, you cannot have, so you can have a vision, but then you cannot have multi-year roadmaps because it's so dynamic. And we heard that Waymo does a lot of quarterly, once in a week releases, so thrice a week and twice a month for mobile apps. So that's, I believe, very good considering uh, the enterprise cycles typically tend to be much longer. So wonderful. And we also heard about the product marketing, the quarterly communication, and then communication across all levels. So not only to the buyer, which is, let's say, the chief executive team, market sales heads, but also to the users and in-app ways of allowing people to know about the new features that are being added. So Harish, you would like to add anything to whatever I've said or corrected?
No, I think you summarized it well, Santosh.
Wonderful. Uh, Thank you. I think that is those help us a lot. At this point of time, maybe I'd like to ask one more question about going global.
Mhm.
So your product is used globally, and surprisingly, I got to know that you're very big in Japan, right?
Mhm.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about your journey, how Japan happened, and what are the specific learnings you got from Japan which can be leveraged across going global.
Yeah. So as I was saying, we started out of India and we have a bunch of customers in the country. Our logical expansions plan was to go out to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Thailand, Indonesia, and so on. And Singapore was a good place to, base our regional office in. So that's something that we did. And through Plug and Play Accelerator, we got introduced to a couple of Japan clients and also a partner who was interested in taking us into Japan. So the sales team said, "Sure, you want us to take Japan? Let's go." And it turned out to be much sooner than we anticipated, but we had the first deal in Japan. And then, because of cultural and time zone differences, we said it's probably better for us to hire someone locally, someone who's bilingual, can speak Japanese and English both, and so on. So we made a sales investment, and then the first customer happened. And then we said, if you're in the market and you're going to have to localize the product into Japanese anyway, why would we not go whole hog? So we augmented the sales investment, made a few additional investments, and so on. And then before we know it, we have a Waymo Japan subsidiary. So it sort of was not necessarily we planned to go into that market very specifically, but the market happened to us. And of course, I think the our sales team has done a good job. I think the product team is still doing a good job with it. And there's also a lot of support, right, from the Japanese government and so on, to encourage technology startups to come into the country and so on. So that's kind of how Japan happened to us. In terms of things that we're learning, which I believe can help the rest of the world. As most of you know, right, Japan has a very high, uh, you know, standard of quality when it comes to product quality. They the end user, forget about the customer, the end user doesn't understand the concept of a defect, right? The notion of a defect is, hey, if there is a defect and you know it's a defect, you should have fixed it. So there should be no defect. It's kind of it's a very unique way of looking at it. So obviously it's put a lot of pressure on the product, on the quality. Like even the smallest of things we've had to pay attention to. And I don't think we are done yet, to be honest. So it's a work in progress. The second thing, and this is very specific probably to Waymo. So as I said, we said our primary user are salespeople, and salespeople in Japan mostly are coat suit people, right? They wear a jacket and so on. It's a formal dressing culture. Second thing is public transport is big, trains are big, right? Unlike let's say India or the US where salespeople travel on bikes or cars and so on. That's not the case there. Uh, the other one, which really is an important point, is the salespeople in Japan don't have a backpack, so they don't use a shoulder pack. They use a handbag. It's the dress code. Just assume that.
More executive, maybe.
Much more executive, right? So you have a handbag. You're traveling by a train, and you're wearing a jacket, right? How are you going to use the app, right? Now, the first answer everybody says is enable voice.
Voice, yeah.
Right? Unfortunately, Japan is a very quiet country. So in the train, there is a board which says, please keep quiet, don't talk. When you enter a lift, there is a banner which says, please maintain silence. And they're very serious about it. So Japanese people don't talk as much to strangers, and there is no mumbling and so on. So from a user interface and design perspective, right, it's a very hard problem to solve. Uh, you know, Assume the person is hanging onto the train, can't leave. Trains are crowded there as well. I joke about it. The difference between a Mumbai local and a Japanese train is there are doors. That's the only difference. Inside the train, it's a different country. It's a whole different country inside the train. So the person is hanging on. Maybe he puts the bag down. He's got to use the phone, and the app has to be working with one thumb. That's it. So that is something that we are obviously working on, making the mobile app one thumb ready. And I think if we can get that done, obviously it benefits
everyone.
Everyone's, right? Exactly. And not to mention the last bit of complexity. Enterprise apps are not similar to consumer apps, right? So they're not built for beautiful delight, joy. You have to get stuff done, which means there are going to be cases where you have to fill a form. Now try filling any form with one thumb. It's super difficult. Like you can't even use the keyboard with one thumb, right? In fact, the entire phone has to balance on your left pinky, and that's stressful. It is stressful. So those are some design related decisions that we're having to make, which I think will benefit the global user base.
I think that's a great constraint to have to solve for a designer, right? Wonderful.
Right.
Solve it with one thumb. And to my knowledge, the only application that I know of is Snappy Bird, if you know that. It used to work with
yes.
So the bird is flying between the pillars, and they did a great job, in fact.
Yeah, they did a very good job with that. Yeah.
Yes.
It's a fun problem to solve.
Yes. It's a good point that now we are moving to the UX design. So there are a lot of questions, as you saw, right? A lot of our audience is from appreciates design a lot. So before we move on to the next segment, I would want to have an audience poll. This is related to design. So this goes live right now. So audience, you would be seeing a question. It is, how is the UX UI team structured in your organization? So it's a multiple choice question. So you can click all that which applies. Whether you have in-house team, UX consultants working within your premises, an external UX UI agency, or don't have a UX team and not applicable. So we have around 60% voting done so far. Let's wait a little bit more. Great. Can I have some more votes, please, on the poll? Yes. Cool. So we are around 70% of the audience has voted. Let me just end the poll. And here are the results. So, not surprising, 82% of the organizations obviously have in-house team. Very good to see that not applicable or don't have a UX team is not there. So everyone has a UX team. People understand the value of it, and I was hoping that there are some uh, people joining in from different industries wherein maybe UX team is not applicable, but then that's not the case. So good to see. So there is a good 82% in-house team, makes absolute sense. There is a split between UX consultants working within the premises of the product organizations versus external UX agencies. So great. Now coming to the UX questions, right?
Mhm.
So how is UX slash UI organized in Vimo, and how is the team structure? Uh, what's the ratio of designers to engineers, if I may ask?
Actually, so let me start with the first one. So we have four designers in-house at this point. One of them is senior, two of them are sort of mid-range, one of them is very new, very junior. Uh, and there is at this point a 1:1 mapping between product managers and designers,
Wow.
which means the obviously we are looking to hire a couple of more product managers. Um, but that ratio seems to have worked pretty well for us. So the
Okay.
PM pretty much works with one designer for the entire duration of the feature. So the designer is not just part of the PRD process, like when the product requirements are being defined and being reviewed, the designer is already involved. And then obviously the designer does the hi-fi, lo-fi designs, and then gets that reviewed with engineering.
Hmm.
And once engineering sort of signs off on the PRD and the UX, only then it moves into the actual build phase.
Okay.
Uh, we are also frankly very fortunate that we have a very vocal engineering team. So as much as the engineering team pushes back on requirements, we also have the engineering team pushing us back on design, which is, hey,
Wow.
this design will not work in that scenario. How would you handle this? Hey, you've done all the happy cases. What happens in the not happy cases? Where you hit an error and so on. That I believe, hats off to our engineering team. They've built this culture of not just taking the design, taking the requirement, and shipping it. So that's kind of how the operating model between product design and engineering works. I didn't mention this, but in my team there is both product management and designers. They are all part of the product organization.
Wonderful. Yeah. I think that's a good one. So,
Hmm.
do you have like Scrum teams? How's your engineering team organized? So, what's the way of development? So, do they follow
Yeah.
Scrum model?
Yes. So for every PRD, right, which is let's say a feature area, there is a feature team that gets formed. So
Hmm.
we will get engineers, we'll get the PM, we'll get the designer, we may get an engineering manager. Sometimes we will just take a technical lead, and that becomes the feature team. So the job of the feature team is to obviously build the feature and then deploy it to customers, and then the team disbands. And then later on, if we need to do another enhancement, we will pull people back, but it may not be the same people.
Oh,
Uh,
so each cycle there can be a different team which gets together and
Correct.
work.
Yeah.
That's pretty interesting.
Primarily from an engineering standpoint, from a product and design standpoint, it will be the same team.
So,
Uh,
doesn't it happen that your PMs are like fighting for the best of engineers who are known?
Hmm. No, actually, to be honest, that has happened zero times.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
because obviously we also have a very, very good engineering team, right? I mean, no questions at all about that. Also, I think it helps from a perspective of getting different engineering, people to look at the same code base. And obviously, there is a fairly strong engineering review, design review, code review process, which helps, keep things aligned. People know that, hey, this is how you will modularize and ship the code and so on.
Okay.
So yeah, we've not had that problem. Of course, we also make sure that this disbanding happens only if we know the project is coming to a close. If it's a long running project, we won't disband. We'll tell people that, hey, this is a 1 year project and we need you to stay at this.
Okay.
So yeah.
Cool. So, one of the questions was about how the designs get finalized. So, can you talk a little bit about that process? Does the product owner finalize the design, or who approves what goes in?
Yeah. So remember, I said the design team is part of the PRD process itself.
Okay.
And once the product requirements and the scope is finalized, only then the design team actually starts the design construction.
Okay.
Now, obviously, that puts pressure, right? It does put pressure on the design team. They may have started some mock-ups, but until it's finalized, they don't share that.
Okay.
Uh, and once the designs are finalized, it goes through an internal product team review. So I do some reviews, the PMs do some reviews, and then it gets to engineering, which is a sharing process. But so far, it's never been, simply accepted by the engineering team. So the engineering team, as I said, they will push back on the designs. They'll say, "Hey, this is too much work. Do we need to do this? Can we cut corners?" Sometimes we'll say yes. Sometimes we'll say no, depending on the context. And then it goes to the engineering team for implementation. But once the obviously the designer is part of the scrums, so this is a daily conversation that happens. And once the feature is built, the UAT is happening. The designer has to give a sign off as well. Otherwise, the design team pushes back saying, "Hey, this is not something we agreed."
Okay.
Either we go back and change the designs or we change the code. So there is both a functional sign off from the QA team, obviously the PM, as well as a design sign off. But ultimate, decision on this is the PM.
So wonderful. I think it's a very collaborative process, which is ideal. Um, has that changed in a way because of this Corona situation, or do you think that process has not been impacted?
It's actually gotten easier since the Corona process, to be honest,
Okay.
because there is everything has to be done on Zoom,
Mhm.
has to be done on remote. So there are no walk up to the person and have that conversation. So everything now becomes you have to follow a process. If there is a 11 o'clock scrum, it means 11 o'clock scrum.
Yeah.
So it's become easier in a lot of ways.
Okay.
Plus, nobody's traveling, so everybody gets 1-2 hours of extra time in their day. So productivity basically has gone up, I think.
There's one small question about digital. So I'm not very sure whether the questioner wanted to talk about the only the digital marketing piece of it, or because some people call digital the entire product process also. Like in non-IT industries, digital means everything. Let's say
Right.
including your apps.
Yeah.
So product we understand, but for your, let's say, a marketing piece, your website or other collateral, do the marketing team also follow some agile process, scrum process, or that's pretty much like Kanban or traditional?
Yeah, our marketing team has their own design at this point,
Okay.
but they don't follow marketing sprints at this point. They have a plan, which mostly is like a monthly plan, but the marketing team doesn't do an agile thing. Also on our website, so this is a big thing because we are enterprise SaaS. The website is a marketing asset. It's not a product asset.
Correct.
This is a big difference for us. So therefore, the product team doesn't own the website.
Okay.
The marketing team completely owns the website.
Sure. Cool. So there's one question from Ramu. He's asking, what are the key areas you would take care while hiring designers, developers, product managers? What's your style of hiring?
Yeah, I'm not involved in engineering hiring, so I'll skip the question on developers. Just a moment, please.
Sure.
Sorry. Yeah, so I'll skip the engineering hiring. From a design as well as from a product manager hiring, I have a fairly simple philosophy, which is, uh, number one is the person should have the relevant experience, and I don't mean, I've worked for 5 years and 7 years. You should have gone through a cycle, again, because we're talking product designers, you should have, built a design of a feature. uh, the feature should have been given to customers, and you should have experienced pain. You should have had learnings. You should have improved on it. For me, that's the full cycle.
Yeah.
And whether it's product manager, whether it is designer, if I were to hire engineers, I would look the same thing. Anybody who says, oh, I built this thing, people used it and they loved it. I think that's not the end of the cycle. The end of version 1 is actually version 1.1 or version 2. So that's something I really like to ask people, saying, tell me a time when you shipped a product, what was the best feature you shipped? What did you learn? What was, what did you think would work and didn't work? And then how did you fix that? So basically a learning culture versus I have done it culture.
Makes sense. I think that's a great way to put it. Uh, the only organizations that will thrive in today's environment are the ones which are learning organizations with so much changes happening at sort of rapid pace.
Yeah,
Great. So,
I say this a lot, right? The part of the process of learning is to make mistakes, and it's okay to make mistakes as long as you don't make the same mistake twice, right?
totally true.
And that's kind of the big thing in my mind.
Great. So I think, yeah, we are just close to the closing time.
Mhm.
There's one question from Sushmita. She's asking, out of all the parts of product management, whatever you do, what part excites you the most? Like, what gets you kicked about?
Honestly, the product analytics part,
Okay.
because for the most part, product management is about placing bets, right?
Mm-hmm.
You have a lot of data that tells you where to bet, where not to bet. But until you see the data, once you've shipped it, and shipping is not an easy thing. There's a lot of pain going through shipping, a
Yes.
lot of people, process, documentation, lot of friction. But when the number comes back, it's like the report card coming back.
Yeah.
Right? I studied the whole year, but what's the score at the end of the year? For me, that's the analytics piece, and that's something that really excites me. Uh, it tells more often than not, it tells you failed, but sometimes it tells you succeeded really, really well, and that is a big thing in my mind.
Yep. Thank you so much, Harish. I think this was a very pleasurable experience for us. Personally, for me, a lot of learning. I believe our audience has been greatly benefited. So before we leave part ways, I would like to ask the last question, which is, what's your one tip, or let's say answer in 2 seconds? Sorry, 2 seconds will be too less. Let's say 2 minutes. Uh,
Uh,
uh, your top tips for people in product management slash UX design, how can they go ahead? So, right.
I'll actually say the same thing that I said. It's okay to make mistakes, just don't make the same mistake twice. I think
Wonderful.
people are just too afraid or conservative, or the management pressure is you know it can be high to say, hey, you can't fail, but you can't have too many can't fail projects in life,
Correct.
because those are all opportunities you know that you don't learn from. You actually don't learn as much from success as you learn from failures.
Sure.
So that's why I would say, hey, it's okay to make mistakes, just learn from those mistakes.
Thank you so much, Harish. Thank you
Okay.
for your time. It's a great pleasure, and we hope to bring you back again at a later point of time, talk to you about your further part of the journey. Uh, and thank you, audience. It was a pleasure having you. And I believe we answered most of the audience questions. We may have left on some, but we would be sharing. So you can, Harish has agreed upon that. You can reach out to him over LinkedIn. That's his preferred method. So you can search for Harish Vaidyanathan and Vimo. You would get him and send him connect request, and he would be happy to answer further questions. And do
Also on
subscribe.
Twitter. Sorry,
Yes.
also on Twitter.
Yep. So what's your handle? Harish V.
Harish V at Twitter.
Yes, at the rate Harish HARISH V for Vaidyanathan. So Harish V is his Twitter handle. Uh, Wonderful having you all, and we do this every month. So Sushmita, could you please post the link for our YouTube channel wherein we host these product talks? You can also see future, uh, yeah, previous product talks as well as future ones. So thank you so much. Thank you,
So
team.
much.
Wonderful having you. Bye bye.